Acrobat Society. I'm the world's greatest acrobat / micro enthusiast, David.
And I'm Travis. Just Travis.
And we're the Game Detectives.
Now, it's been a while since Nintendo has released a mainline Zelda game. The last one came out in 2011. That's 5 years ago. And while David is excitedly waiting for Breath of the Wild, we're going to take a look at the most recent Zelda game, Skyward Sword.
Now, Skyward Sword has gotten near universal critical acclaim, with multiple 10 out of 10s from major websites. But for some reason, public reception of the game didn't go so well, and a lot of people don't like the game because of the controls and the settings. So we're going to look at just what makes and breaks Skyward Sword.
The number one complaint from many gamers about Skyward Sword is the motion controls at the heart of sword combat and much more. A lot of people think these controls are too finicky, too inaccurate, or too boring to be more than a gimmick. But unlike a lot of gimmicks in video game history, the motion controls in Skyward Sword actually work extremely well and are used to their fullest potential.
Unlike the Wii version of Twilight Princess, your sword in Skyward Sword actually follows your every movement with the Wii remote. So if you raise it up or you stab with the remote, Link follows suit.
Unlike previous entries in the series, you can't just button mash to attack. Now you actually need to be purposeful in your technique. While it's true that it takes longer to finish common enemies like a Deku Baba, the motion controls are extremely immersive because every movement you make has a corresponding movement in-game.
A lot of other Nintendo games, from Phantom Hourglass to Star Fox Zero, use creative control schemes, but don't have the intricate mechanics to actually make them work. Skyward Sword actually fully realizes the motion controls by directly responding to every action and having a lot of different items utilize these controls. For example, bomb bowling is now possible. People are always clamoring for more innovative and lifelike controls, and that's actually what Skyward Sword gave.
And these motion controls are fully realized in a lot of the mini-bosses and bosses of the game. The Stylemaster, Skirvo, Dreadfuse, and Moldarak, and so many other enemies use motion controls to the greatest effect by actually allowing your enemies to block, making the game much more realistic. This is especially true in the Girahim fights, where every sword swing has to be calculated to be as effective as possible.
The motion controls for dousing also work pretty well. With dousing, you go into first-person mode, and you move your sword around the screen to pinpoint nearby locations of specific items. At points when you have to find items in the mainline quest, such as when you need to find parts for the Earth Temple key, using dousing helps extremely and makes hunting for these items even more fun. But some of the motion controls don't work particularly well, especially in the Loftwing sections. While the controls aren't particularly horrible, they show the least finesse. The Loftwing can be a little difficult to control, especially in small areas with tight turns, but besides this, the motion controls work like a charm.
And flying the Loftwing isn't as fun as sailing with the King of Red Lions, so...
Speaking of Zelda companions, I know a lot of people despise, or should I say, demise, your Skyward Sword companion Fi. But personally, I had absolutely no problem with her. I actually like talking with her to hear more about the world around me. While she can get a little annoying when she states things that are plainly obvious and right in front of our faces, I think overall, she's much more help than hindrance.
Some people don't like the game because they think it has too much hand-holding, such as with Fi, and that can be true, especially in the first dungeon of the game, Skyview Temple. It's such a simple dungeon with almost no defining characteristics or central areas besides where you get the beetle. It's so easy that it throws off the momentum of the game, and the eye puzzle is kind of finicky. It doesn't work right.
But Skyward Sword actually has a lot of really good dungeons, and has some of the best dungeon design in the series. In particular, I think the Ancient Cistern stands out because of the Buddhist design. The top floors of the temple are based on heaven, whereas the basement is supposed to be hell. And the small thread you climb up, where bokoblins start attacking you, is based on the story The Spider's Thread, which is of Buddhist origin.
The dungeons are much more open in Skyward Sword as compared to the segmented rooms typical of previous Zelda games. These newer dungeons feature larger rooms and more centralized designs, which is much more realistic to an actual temple or dungeon. While the sand ship goes back to using smaller rooms, the design of the dungeon fits that model, making the sand ship a very tight and extremely fun dungeon to play through.
In fact, Skyward Sword probably has the most variety in dungeons in any game of the series. The Sand Ship and Lanayru mining facility both have advanced technology and time stones. The Ancient Cistern has a nice relaxing atmosphere and interesting backstory. The Fire Sanctuary has a lot of underground puzzles, and the Earth Temple features rolling around in magma using a stone ball. While not all of them are the most original, they still offer a lot in terms of variety of things to do, and deviate from one another to keep things interesting.
Going back to the Timeshift Stones, the different puzzles that utilize the Time Stones are actually pretty fun and unique to the series. By being able to travel back in time in specific areas, you can resurrect old stones that have been eroded away, or bring back forgotten technology such as conveyor belts.
The Timeshift Stones add a unique mechanic to the Zelda series and give the game different kinds of puzzles to go through. The juxtaposition of the old sandy desert and the thriving technology also makes the two Timeshift Stone dungeons stand out as wholly unique from the other dungeons in the series.
And that can be said for most of the bosses as well. In particular, the Coloctus fight is incredibly memorable since you use the whip to literally rip its limbs off and beat it up with its own sword. Scaldera uses a track rather than arena, which makes the boss fight unique. The Girahim fights are pretty good, even if a little slow, and Moldarak can be really fun, especially when you have to use the right slashes to target its eyes.
But some boss fights just need to be stopped. Like, actually stop making me rematch the Imprisoned! The Imprisoned is so slow and boring that it gets super frustrating when you have to do it 3 different times. If you only had to do the last fight with the Imprisoned, it might have been okay, but the repetition just kills it. And Tentalus is absolutely horrific, and is just a simple shoot him in the eye, slash him in the eye, repeat kind of boss that should have been scrapped years ago.
Just like the bosses, most of the items in the game are used to a great effect. The bombs, bow and arrow, gust bellows, and slingshots are repeats from previous games, but they're used much better in Skyward Sword. The bow controls much simpler and more intuitive, while the whip can be used in a variety of situations to pull and grab onto objects and enemies. While most of the bosses and the items are pretty memorable, unfortunately a lot of the music in the game doesn't fare as well. The transition to a fully orchestrated score works really well for the game, but unfortunately a lot of the music falls into the trap of generic, epic video game music, and there aren't a lot of memorable tunes or melodies that distinguish this game from the others. The Goddess Harp, while fun, takes away the focus from the memorable tunes that Ocarina and Wind Waker had.
Additionally, the plot itself isn't really all that inventive. Zelda does have a more active role in the game, with her and Imba visiting shrines to seal demise, but the plot is still very similar to every other Zelda title, where you have to save the world from a very powerful being who wants to destroy it.
As a main villain, Demise doesn't really stand out in that long line of final bosses. He only shows up at the end, taking away some of that ominous threat that villains like Ganondorf had in Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. He also doesn't seem to have that much of a stake in what's actually going on in the game, as his only motivation is to get revenge on Hylia and destroy the world.
There are only a few instances of originality, such as with the fact that Zelda finally doesn't get captured in the end, and, most importantly, in the character of Girahim. The Demon Sword of Demise is very inventive for a main character, and his mood swings and flamboyant personality offer a stark contrast to the other stoic villains in the past. He also acts as a counterpart to Fi and Link, who show relatively little emotional variety in the game.
Unfortunately, a lot of the other characters in the game aren't all that memorable. The new creatures are interesting, but a lot of them lack distinct personalities. The Kikwis are cute, but they don't add much in terms of interesting design or humorous dialogue. Some of the Magmas, such as the ones that show up in the Earth Temple, are pretty fun, but there are so many that it kind of becomes monotonous seeing them all the time.
The ancient robots, on the other hand, are pretty fun and interesting characters to add to Zelda lore. Most of them don't have names or distinctive personalities, as would be expected of robots, but Scrapper, the robot who transports stuff for you throughout the game, doesn't particularly like Link, and there's a lot of funny moments that come out of that tension. These robots are great additions because there are only a few who are actually important to the story, as opposed to the other creatures in the game.
A lot of the human characters, however, aren't all that interesting. Most of the people in Skyloft are well-meaning and kind, which gives them a little lack of variety.
However, Skyloft did reward us with one important contribution to pop culture as a whole. No one can say he's not on the loose, it's Groose. While he seems like a simple thug in the beginning of the game, he actually turns into a really important thug at the end of the game, helping you defeat the imprisoned and protecting Impa while she's all super old and wrinkly. His character development makes him stand out from the other characters of the game.
But unfortunately, Skyward Sword commits the cardinal sin of not including Tingle in their game. 0 out of 10 would never play again.
But in reality, Skyward Sword has some pretty good puzzles, interesting dungeons and boss designs, fun new characters and creatures, and a sense of exploration and adventure, all of which contribute to Skyward Sword being one of the best Zelda games.
While it's not my personal favorite in the series, I think that Skyward Sword sticks out with its fun art design, which is a cross between the Senpai Wind Waker and dark, edgy Twilight Princess. Its fun and interactive motion control system, and its memorable gameplay.
So that ends our first video for Zelda Month, Skyward Sword.
What do you think about the game? Let us know in the comments.